Be outside. If you're paid in full with your dues by a certain date, you're able to vote in our endorsement meeting and our endorsement voting, which will happen at 9. If you're not a member, we encourage you to join. There's membership forms outside as well, so please do join. I believe membership is it $35 or 30? 30 or 35, I'm sorry.
35.
35, yeah. I should have these things in here. We will be at the Solana Stroll. We will have a booth at the Solana Stroll, so please do look us up there. We also have a slot in the parade, and we would love it if we could get a bunch of people to walk in the parade with us. So if you are going to, please see Stephanie, and if you can commit, please see Stephanie. She'd love to have a whole bunch of volunteers waving the donkey and walking down the street with her. So we are going to do 2 hours. First hour will be school board, followed by city council in the next hour or so. The questions were gathered from our officers and from a general call for questions that we made, just so that everyone's can be reassured. I had nothing to do with the selection of questions. I merely gathered them, and I'm handing them off to our moderator tonight, Julia, who is one of our officers, and our question sorter over there, Kathy, who is our secretary. And Kathy also, I think you have pieces of paper to hand out to people in the audience if they'd like to submit a question. So we'd like to do, we'll do as many prepared questions as take up about half the time, and then we'll open it up to, then we'll take as many audience questions as we can. We'd definitely love to get the questions from the audience. And so, I think I was saying that I had nothing to do with the questions. Yes, I did mention that. I think that's it for introductions. The format is each candidate is going to have 2 minutes to introduce themselves and do a general introduction. Then we'll do 1 minute each for each question response for each of the candidates, and we'll rotate through the candidates so a different one starts every time. And please fill out a piece of paper if you'd like to ask a question and hand it over to Kathy. And I think with that, are there any questions? Yes?
Some of us brought literature to hand out.
Yes.
Where does it go?
Sorry, I guess we were supposed to set up a table, but there are numerous tables out there. Please feel free to leave your literature out there, and maybe Gabby can help set it up in a nice way. Thank you for the question. Any other questions or comments before we begin? And as I mentioned, we're getting going a little bit late, so I think we'll let the school board go a little bit past 8 to make sure that they get plenty of questions. And with that, we'll begin.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Julia Chang-Frank, and one of the officers here. Nick, can you just remind us, is there a timekeeper? There's a timekeeper, right?
Yes, thank you. So I have these cards for timekeeping. For the 2-minute one, yellow will be 30 seconds, and of course the red is stop. So for the 1 minute questions, 1 minute responses, this will be 15 seconds. And this will be stop.
So 15 seconds left, right?
15 seconds left,
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for being here. I think I'll just start. The first is just the introduction. So each one of you has 2 minutes to do an introduction, and I'll start with Sarah. We can just go on down the line. So we've got all the weeks, and make sure the timekeeper's ready to do that.
Yes.
Get the full 2, or do a bit
Thank
more.
you. Yeah.
And
One second.
okay, so I guess when he gives you the cue, you can, Sarah, please feel free to begin.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, that's my cue. So my name is Sara Hinkley. I know some of you. I'm the parent of a 4th grader at Ocean View and a 7th grader at Albany Middle School. I've lived in Albany for a while. I lived in the village for 7 years. I've been involved with the schools since my older son started kindergarten in 2011 as a classroom volunteer and PTA member. I also served on the Ocean View City Council for 2 years and helped with the Measure LL campaign back in the day. Not that long ago, I guess. For several years, I've been working as an activist to support policies in Albany that promote meaningful inclusion, such as the sanctuary city policies addressing immigration enforcement by the police and the safe haven policy for the district that protects immigrant families. I'm running for Albany School Board because I care deeply about the importance of public education, both to students and to our society. I teach and work with undergraduates at UC Berkeley. Most of them come from California public schools, so I have a sense of what it takes to produce those undergraduates. I'm a strong believer in the need for strategies to address persistent inequality and segregation in our education system. My approach, I feel like this is the ref, yellow card, red card thing. My approach to being a board member will reflect my commitment to collaboration and equity. The three things that are motivating me the most are, one, that I want to improve not just communication, but meaningful participation and collaboration in key decisions. Two, I want to address gaps in educational achievement in our district. And three, I want to work to ensure that all children in our district have a feeling of equal belonging, that they are equally important and valued, and that that's reflected in the diversity of their teaching staff and their governing bodies. I didn't even make it to the red card.
Yeah, we're 5 seconds left. Very good.
Totally.
Excellent. Okay, oh, and one more thing, I'm sorry. We do have mics if we need them. This room is small enough that I think we might not need them, but if at any time, feel free to use the mic. I'll turn the PA system on and the audience as well.
Yeah, also you can raise your hand if you can't hear somebody, and we'll ask them to use the mic.
And one last thing, I'm Nick Pilch, by the way. I don't think I introduced myself. Officer in the club and various other hats around town. Sorry for the interruption.
Are you ready? Anytime, Rob.
Go ahead.
Sure. So Ross Stapleton-Gray. I am currently the vice president of the board, so running for re-election for second and final term, since we've still got term limits for the board, something that I was in favor of not repealing. I think it is important to have turnover. I would also say I think it's important to have some institutional memory on the board, but I'm running not just to be 4 years of experience retained, but to see through some of the stuff we have been working on. I had prepared remarks where I came out of the gate talking about the Instagram incident and construction and the budget. None of those look great, or TBD on construction. But I would absolutely say the first 2 years of my service on the board were uneventful. The third was eventful, and I think a great example of being caught flat-footed as an administration. I think the board, and I think people running for the board need to, and people who work with the board, people who come appeal to the board, need to understand what boards do. Right? We meet very openly. We meet as a public forum. We are a sounding board, a clearinghouse, a communications bridge. We're not the people doing the work. We have people to do the work. But our goal as the board really ought to be to inform the people doing the work. And I found that the Instagram incident extremely frustrating as a board member trying to foster communication, to the point of calling the Trump Department of Education to talk to the student privacy people to say, what can we say? And we could have said a lot more than we did. And the administration has heard that from me. So I'm running out of time. We're in the midst of construction. We've got 2 sites underway and 2 TBD. To spend $90 million, it's a lot of work, and I'd really like to be there to continue what we've been doing with the knowledge of what we've been doing and the questions to ask and how we're doing it. And then lastly, we're absolutely going to face budget cuts.
Good time to come in.
Okay.
Go ahead when you're ready.
Good evening. My name is Clementina Durón, and I'm a grandparent. And I'd like to tell you why I think maybe I'm a good candidate for the school board. I've had 30 years of experience in the public school sector. Started off as an elementary school teacher, was that as well as a resource teacher, a lot of other little things that teachers do, and also a curriculum developer. And then I became a principal, and that was the other 15 years, in elementary, middle, and junior high. I go back to the junior high days. And so I've had lots of experience in actually large districts. I was in Berkeley initially, then I went to Oakland, where I spent half of my time in Oakland, and then I was in San Francisco as well. My perspective, I come from that, besides an educational experience and viewpoint, I'm also have concerns as a mother, as a grandmother. I have two children in Albany, two grandchildren in the Albany middle school, one in middle school and one in Marin. And also as a Latina, I think my experiences, life experiences, have given me the opportunity to have nuances that I think give me a certain perspective on equity and inclusion and equality. I consider I have some good social skills, and I've been a long life advocate for children. I am passionate about education. I think besides parenting, it's the single most important influence on our children's future. I have lots to say about the role of teachers and staff, and about making education an equal playing field for everyone. Okay, I guess that's it for right now. Thank you.
Okay, ready? So I hope everybody can hear me. My name is Charlie Blanchard, and I am running for re-election. I ran 4 years ago because I was concerned about the quality of the buildings we were going to build. And I wanted to see us build seismically safe, modern, sustainable buildings, and I wasn't seeing that in the building plans that were circulating. Today, we have launched 2 new projects. We have 2 more in the pipeline. And I'm happy to say that we have successfully tapped the expertise of the community. We have an advisory committee of professional architects and engineers, and they have helped guide us through the process so that we get good, sustainable, well-designed buildings. 14 years ago, I ran for the board for the first time, and what I was concerned about then were budget cuts and the divisiveness that was splitting the school community. Sounds familiar. It's what we face today. I have worked over the years as a board member with 13 other board members, with 3 superintendents, and with hundreds of community members and staff members. And what I do is I work with other people to bridge differences. And during that time, we have successfully balanced the budget several times, a budget that looked just as bad as the current budget. We have renovated Cougar Field, we have rebuilt Albany Pool, and we have launched the new buildings at the middle school and the high school. We can do this, we can balance the budget, we can work together, and we can build Ocean View and Marin. The key is we need to work together.
Oh, okay. My name is Brian Doss. I am a former graduate of Albany High, and that's when I first really kind of fell in love with the city. And when I had kids, I decided that Albany would be a great place for them to go. They can enjoy a lot of the things that I enjoyed as a student here, and they have. Unfortunately, there was an incident that happened that kind of derailed that. And that's kind of why I started my transition into wanting to run for the school board. I mean, there's many other reasons as well. I think Albany's a great place, and I want to be a part of the things that make Albany great. But also, when I went home and had to have a conversation with my daughters about what happened and how, and I saw how it affected them. And then my 8-year-old at the time asked me what I was going to do to help. And so I started attending board meetings to see kind of how I could get involved. And then after one of the board meetings, I talked to one of the students, and one of the students shared her experience, and I was listening to her, and then I said the same thing that everybody says: what can I do to help? What can I do to make you feel better? And she didn't have an answer for me. So my response was, I will run for the school board to make sure that you never feel like you are not represented, and that you know that this district cares about you as much as you care about your own education. So that's one of the main reasons why I'm here this evening.
Perfect.
Thank you. So that ends the introductory 2-minute part. Now, the questions will be 1 minute each. And so when you see the yellow card go up, that's 15 seconds. So I'm gonna actually start with Ross for the second question, for the first of the question and answers. And the first question is, how can we improve teacher pay and retain and attract good teachers who can afford living here?
Well, so what y'all, many of you probably know, and what you need to know about this issue is that we get money from the state almost, not exclusively, but majorly, like 80% or something like that. We supplement that with parcel taxes. We could raise parcel taxes, but that's about our only lever to get more money in. We are absolutely seeing teacher expenses rise. We're paying more for pension per the state's formula, et cetera. So a lot of the money in is out of our hands. The way we could get teacher raises really is to have fewer teachers, and that's gonna be likely where we're gonna end up. You know, the only way, it's like squeezing a balloon. If we're gonna give higher wages, it's going to be to fewer of them, unless we're willing to pass a parcel tax beyond what we're already doing. We'll have to replace that one soon. It's not an easy solution at all, given our dependence on the state. We can lobby the state, we are lobbying the state, but that's about it in terms of, we can only increase the revenues from that side in a very few ways.
Thank you. Clementina?
To the same question.
To the same question.
You know, it is so tough. Everybody knows, you know, in your own, wherever you work, the same issues come up in terms of how do you sustain the folks that have the experience and are well-trained, but that are paid more than somebody entering in for the first time. And I don't think you get a balance really, and certainly Albany wants to retain its experts and those teachers that you know have already so many years of experience. So at the same time, as Ross mentioned, the money situation is, you know, I think the solution is going to be at the state level, and I think that's going to require a lot of politicking so that the Prop 13 changes. That's how it's, we're not going to solve it, otherwise we're nickel and diming it, and we're not going to come up with a good solution. So I think it's really a statewide issue, and it's something we're all going to have to get involved in.
Thank you. Charlie?
Yeah. So our starting salary is $49,000 and our highest salary is $96,000 for teachers. We have actually increased teacher pay over the past 5 years by 11.7%. It's not a lot, but it's been steady, 2 or 3% a year. That's probably what we can do, because we are not going to get a windfall of revenues, but we can at least provide COLA. Probably the best thing we can do to attract and retain teachers is what we have been doing, which is to provide full health care benefit coverage. That's unique among school districts in Alameda County at this point.
Thank you. Brian?
I think the best way to bring in quality teachers is to explain to them the benefits of working in Albany. You touched on a great point about the medical benefits, because if you go outside of the district, they have to pay those out of pocket. I have a friend who's a teacher in Oakland, and she talks about that all the time. So I definitely think that that's a great benefit. But what we do understand about teachers is that they are not doing it for the money. So teachers are not teaching because they're going to get rich. They're teaching because they care about education and they care about the students, and that's why they do it. So I think that I think that it's important, if you're recruiting teachers, you have to know where to look. And once you find them, then you have to talk to them about the benefits of working in Albany, because there are places where maybe they can make more money, but there are many other great things about being a teacher in this district, and so we have to make sure we share those.
Thank you. Clementina, this next question will be
Oh,
for
okay.
Sarah.
I didn't know.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Everyone's paying attention. That's good to know. So I think there are two questions in here. One is, how do you get more money to be able to maybe compensate teachers better? I imagine we'll come back to the budget. But I think the second is, given a pool of money for teacher compensation, how do you make decisions about how that gets distributed? And I'm in a lecturers union at UC. I know that, teachers are not just interested in their salary, there's compensation, there's working conditions, there are other forms of support that they want. And I think asking teachers to help us solve that problem is one step in understanding what it takes to retain good teachers. And I think that these trade-offs, like I think Ross mentioned about you can have more teachers with less pay or fewer teachers with more pay, again, I think those are decisions that have to be made with a range of stakeholders. I've seen the iterations of the classroom size debate over the years. That will certainly come back up, and I think that's the scope of decisions. It's not just up to the board members.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so Clementina, this answer you'll start with, and the question is, tell us your views on charter schools.
Oh, interesting. How'd you get to me first? If I can be 100% honest, in my 30 years, that was probably the most important achievement in my educational career. And the reason why is because we were able to give parents, working class, poor parents, English limited parents, another opportunity, another option for their children. And I would ask you as parents, because I have felt the heat here in Albany because of my stance, but I would ask everyone in this room who's a parent, if it ever came to you making a choice about what's best for your child, and there are no options for you, which for most folks in this room, there will always be options. But if you were a parent with no options and suddenly there was one single thing where your children could feel safer, in an environment where there aren't gangs, where they feel safe and secure, would you take that? Sorry, no more time.
Okay, thank you. Charlie?
Yeah. So I know students who have been served well by a charter school, but charter schools use public resources, and they need to live by the same rules that public schools do. They need to provide full accountability of how they use those resources. They need to provide full accountability for academic achievement. I don't think they should be for-profit schools. They need to be nonprofit if there are charter schools. No one's proposed a charter school in Albany. I'd oppose it if they did. I think that there might be a place, but I think they basically need to live by the same rules as the public school districts do.
Thank you. Brian?
I think that it's important to have the option. I think that public school is great, and I think that public school is an opportunity for all students to go to school and receive their education, but at the same time, charter schools work for some students as well. I do agree that they should be held to the same standards. For-profit, I think that if there are for-profit schools, it eliminates some of the problems that public schools have, because they can take that funding and they can separate it whenever they see fit. But I think that each district is different, so charter school might work for some, it might not work for others. I don't know if it would be a great fit in Albany, but that would just be something to do more research on.
Thank you.
Saw that red.
Sarah?
I think like a lot of policy choices in public education, the decisions that can work well for individuals do not work well for the collective, and I think charter schools I'm concerned about their expansion, and it's not clear to me that even individually they perform better or serve people better. It is clear that they siphon resources in the form of public dollars and in the form of the resources of the families that are drawn to them out of public schools. And I don't think they're a solution for improving struggling schools overall. I understand that for specific communities, the attraction of using the charter school option as a way to evade a struggling school, that I'm deeply troubled by their expansion in California and elsewhere. And I would rather see resources go into solving the problems that we have in a public school system than in expanding the ability of people to use charters to take public money.
So I'll say, everything you've just said, great. And when I first moved here, or when I first was thinking of running for the board, one of the ideas that occurred to me was trying to find collaboration with the UC. And we're right here, there's a school of education, et cetera. I can imagine creating something kind of like a charter school in collaboration with UC. I would never like to see the sort of looting of the public school funding to create a less governed charter school as has happened in Oakland and all over the map. Let me talk about two other things. One of the things I'm advocating for on the board, we've had some discussions on it already, is to turn McGregor High from a continuation high school to an alternative high school. You can't go to McGregor unless you're 16 now. Well, we have kids who are coming in as ninth graders who don't fit into a regular school environment very well. And we have that option. We could create an alternative school there. On the last one of the issues I raised at the last meeting, Tilden. Tilden is a for-profit school that's seen a lot of Albany High kids because they are not getting met at Albany High, and we've got to find out why that is.
Thank you. Okay, so this next question, Charlie, we'll start with you. And the question is, last year, Superintendent Val Williams committed to class sizes of 24 students or fewer for grades K through 3 at Albany elementary schools. And this part, in fact, that almost every second grade class at each school currently has 25 students, this person wrote. How would you help ensure that these promises are kept and class sizes remain at appropriate levels?
So that's going to be a tough one. That's something we have to talk about. Basically, the conversation about the budget is going to come down to class size at elementary, and it's going to be paired against electives at middle school and high school. It's a conversation that we need to really have and we need to explore what is important to us as a community. It's not clear to me that maintaining every class at 24 is what is best for the community. Now, what is clear is that in order to retain state funding for smaller class sizes at elementary, you need to continue to maintain K-3 at 24 students or fewer at a school site throughout that grade span. Second grade might be higher, first grade lower. You can still retain that funding. So it doesn't make sense to lose that money.
Thank you. Brian?
I think that number is a little low. My daughter's fourth grade class, currently they have 27 students in the fourth grade. And the class seems to run fine. I think that when you're older, third, fourth, and fifth grade, you're able to kind of monitor yourself a little bit. So having that number be a little higher, I think is okay. I don't think it takes away from what the kids are learning. With those kids, they're sharp. They surprise me every time I go into the classroom. I think that for the younger classes, I don't know if you guys have recently volunteered in the class, but kindergarten, first grade, 24 seems like a good number. 22 would probably be better. So I think that if those class sizes were smaller, and then as they get older, the class sizes were bigger, we'll be okay.
Thank you. Sarah?
Sure. I think the class, as I said, I've been through a few iterations. I think every year there are parents who feel my class is bigger than I was told that it was going to be. Kids don't come in convenient increments of numbers, so I think it's important to communicate to parents the process for deciding class sizes and how those decisions are made in response to state mandates, in response to district policy, and in response to just the actual number of kids that shows up on day one. I think that it is important for us to maintain the levels that allow us to get state funding. I also think, again, it's important to talk with teachers as class sizes comes back up in the budget discussion, to talk about where small class sizes are the most effective for the performance of the overall district, because all of those second graders are going to be seniors in high school someday. So I think, again, communicating with parents about how that's determined and with teachers about how it should be set is important.
So I actually heard from Val and Paul Black as president of the board today on that. About half of the classes are at 25 and the other are at 24, and that may change as enrollment, either people arrive or leave in this school year. Val claims that that was a promise for last year and not for this year. I think I'd have to go look at the videos to understand it. I will say this, if it's 25 this year, it will be whatever the max is permissible if we're costing it out and figuring out how not to lose class size reduction, et cetera. We're in for some years of pain, and a little pain this year might be transferring a little more to next year. I would absolutely urge the superintendent to honor any commitment to keep class sizes a given size, but recognize that classes will be larger next year, almost certainly. It's about the one way we can increase, say, pay to teachers or maintain electives at the high school is raising class sizes in other classes.
Clementina?
24, I don't know where that number came from originally. And studies you can find any study to validate what number you like. Like 20 is a nice number too. And I agree that the younger the kids are, the smaller numbers of kids in the classroom, the better initially, like a K3, and then 4 or 5 to get more students. So I think ultimately it's a question of budget and what is really realistic, and the other is, certainly the other element is working with the teachers to be sure that everybody's on the same page, because, you know, having 15 kids in the class is wonderful. So we really have to be realistic, and I think the budget is going to be the reality. And I think teachers have to be, connected arm in arm with the board in terms of any decisions.
Thank you. So this last, that's it, right, for this term?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and do we want to go to?
Question, yeah, there's one more question
Okay.
from here, so I'll let Ryan start that, and then we'll finish it out, and then we'd like to aggregate the questions here and take some from the audience.
And
So-
did everyone get a chance to get a piece of paper if they wanted one and
Yeah,
hand
you can
it
pass
over to Kathy?
So you can pass any of your questions to Kathy, or just pass it down the row. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else?
Okay, just hand it over.
Okay, so the last prepared question is for Brian. How can we best prepare kids for the workplace demands in the coming decades?
Well, I think that question was actually created just for me. I'm currently a recruiter, so I prepare people for work. So I think it's important to give kids a foundation. I mean, you can place somebody in a job and you can give them a few tools where they can kind of make their way through the job. But if you want them to truly succeed, you have to give them the foundation to be able to communicate with people and collaborate with people so that if they don't understand something, they know how to figure it out. And so I think that it's important to give the kids the tools necessary to navigate the world outside of Albany. And so the way that we do that is through diversity and through education of the outside world, so that the kids are not surprised when things happen.
Thank you. Sarah?
Sure. So I see the kids for whom college is the right choice. I see them and try to shepherd them out the other end of that process. I think critical thinking is still an important component for being in the workplace. basic skills like writing and communication. I also think the ability to work, as Brian said, collaboratively with people, to engage in a socially complex, racially, ethnically diverse environment, to participate in workplaces with men and women and be able to navigate complex social environments is more and more important. I don't think we know what the future jobs look like, but I think it's the same set of skills we've been trying to give children for generations, so that they're prepared to meet whatever success looks like for them. I see kids who come out of high schools not able to write a letter to a potential employer. It's important to provide that level of basic skill no matter what the job markets look like.
Thank you. Ross?
Yeah, I'd say, so I'm a technologist sort of by training and have taught at universities and have been a lifelong learner. You know, I started 18 months ago learning Irish using Duolingo, and I'm astonished and stunned that we wait until 7th grade to teach foreign language in all these schools. Notwithstanding that being aware of other cultures, other languages, other ways of working, et cetera, it ought to be a foundation of thriving in the world now. So I would say the two things I guess I would focus on is trying to make the schools more aware of and like the outside world in terms of how challenges are addressed, and opening up to alternative approaches to technologies. I mentioned the idea of turning Mac High into an alternative high school as opposed to continuation high school, and giving more latitude to incorporate things like online classes, et cetera, where the teacher becomes a facilitator and a coach rather than a sage on a stage, sort of a standard teaching someone in a box.
Thank you. Clementina?
I'd certainly like to piggyback on what Ross has said, because I think that lifelong learning is what we all want to take away, I think. I think we all, at whatever stage we are in life, can grow some more from learning and being open to the new challenges. And so I think that language certainly is one that I would be a proponent for, that we can no longer be a monolingual society. We're really not, because Spanish is so dominant here as well. But our kids have got to learn another language, because languages, we all know, goes culture and a deeper understanding of other people's and maybe their processes for thinking and values, etc. It's a win-win situation when you learn a second language. And I would also propose ethnic studies. You know, we're 70% of K-12 population today is kids of color, and 52% of that are Latinos. So we have to address that and be sure that everybody in the end ultimately needs to learn how to appreciate each other, social skills, talk to one another. Okay, I'll stop there.
Charlie?
So one thing we know is that 10 years, 20 years from now, most of the jobs that young people will be working don't even exist today. So we can't just train them for specific jobs. In fact, we need to get out of the mindset that we're career or college preparation. All kids need to be career and college ready. So learning career skills will help the students who are going on to college. Being college ready will help the students who may not be ready to go to college. And I would just add to that internships play a role here, such as what the EdSet program does. Being out there and doing an internship one day a week, that gives students something that they don't get in the classroom.
Thank you. I'm just going to are these arranged in a specific order? Oh, so there's one too, okay. So Sarah, back to you. This comes directly from me in the audience, and I am a resident voter property owner who does not have a child in the school system. How will you look out for our type of constituent interests?
Great question. I think people often forget that there are a lot of people who aren't connected to the schools, or were connected to the schools and aren't anymore. One of my main goals as a board member would be to figure out how to communicate better out to the community at large. I don't even think we do a great job right now of communicating to people who are attached to the schools. I think Kim, who's here, has done a great job of trying to get information out to people who don't come to board meetings, emailing them about the issues that come up in advance of the board meeting, after the board meeting, making it clear when decisions are being made that are going to affect different peoples. Not all of the decisions would affect the person who presumably wrote that question, but some will, and I think it's important to have board minutes and agendas go out not just to the school mailing list, but maybe to the city mailing list, be posted on websites that people who aren't in the schools go to, or other forums. Rob?
So the official answer, is, the Albany official answer is, well, good schools keep property values high. I'd say, I think we ought to educate everybody. I think we're very lucky to be in an island of rather committed education and well-supporting education folks. We could do more in our area, in our region. I had a very good discussion with Julie Winkelstein, the former children's librarian, about trying to launch in Albany and Contra Costa a counterpart to the Berkeley Baby Book Project, which is getting funding from a foundation set up by Dolly Parton, of all people, to get books to kids ages like 0 to 5. Get them in the hands of families who can read to their kids. We really don't need it here. There's absolutely poverty in Albany. There are about a dozen homeless kids in Albany schools when I last heard. There are people who are working at the track who are seasonal, and there are kids here who do not have a lot. We could help them that same way, but I certainly think we could help the larger region, most of which not as well off.
Communication has probably been one of the weaker links in this whole thing in the Albany schools. I think emails, et cetera, all that stuff is given too much credit. I think we have to go back to the old-fashioned way, and by that I mean that if I was elected to be a board member, I would have a forum once a month at the library or wherever, at a coffee place, wherever. Anyone who would want to meet to discuss issues of the day, of concerns to them or questions they have. Because I ran for the school board a couple years ago, and a resident emailed me and said, hey, I'm concerned about this, I don't have kids, but blah, blah, blah. And it's so easy to talk to people, but the Brown Act in particular has been originally for the good of the people, and it has been turned upside down where we don't feel we can talk to board members, we don't feel board members hear us because of the Brown Act. So there's got to be new ways of talking to one another.
Thank you. Charlie?
So this sounds like we have to talk about taxes. And I think most of my neighbors whose kids have gone through the schools are happy to continue paying the taxes. This community has been very generous in its financial support for the schools. We have an obligation to spend that money wisely and well. That's what we have to do. When it comes to building new buildings, we have to build buildings that will last for 50 years. When it comes to the budget, we have to use the money as wisely and as well as we can. People don't generally complain to me about the taxes being too high. Their kids went through the schools, they want to support the schools, but they just want to know that the money is being used properly and it's being used for the kids.
Brian?
I think that it's important to keep in mind that everybody that lives in Albany doesn't have kids in Albany, but that the things and the decisions that the board makes will have an effect on them. It could be something as simple as the construction and how it will affect the people that live on the block over from the school, and when construction happens at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. So kind of thinking about the neighbors and how the decisions that the school board makes has an effect on them, I think is important. I think that everybody kind of said the same thing about being transparent with the decisions, and also allowing for people to communicate and ask questions and be available to answer those questions, and not feel like the board is on this weird made-up pedestal, but that we're all working together to make Albany better.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, okay. So, okay, thank you. Let's see, so the next question is for you, Ross. How could the Instagram incident have been handled better?
Lots
In 1 minute.
Lots of, well, so I would challenge any of y'all who would like to think about this, go look at the new disciplinary matrix, or the behavioral matrix of the high school, and go back and from what you know about the Instagram, well, from the get-go, I'd love to see a student journalist dive into this. Have somebody out dig up all of the facts from all the sides and come out and say, here's what actually happened. We even on the board don't know everything that happened for all sorts of reasons. I think from the get-go, what happened was some people did something that has happened at a lot of other schools. In this case, 14 kids got suspended. It was like the administration brought a shotgun to a fist fight. And that led to ostracizing a bunch of kids and creating this sort of pariah group. The reaction was not good. We basically had a sort of a mob setting to deal with something that really should have been handled directly, openly. We should have heard a lot more about what was happening. And per the rules, it was an overreaction to something that was very serious, but could have been handled a lot better through normal means.
Thank you, Clementina.
You know, listening to the response, I go, we live in different worlds, because the way I felt about it, the way I responded to the incident is very different from the way, Ross, you're talking about it. It was such an egregious act, racist, misogynistic in every sense. And once again, I ask you, if it was your child, how would you have responded? And these kids, you know, and actually, a year and a half later, talking to their parents were still crying about it. It hurt them so much. And the reason why? Lack of communication, the very essence of talking to the parents and saying, how is your child doing? Was not communicated. Nobody ever said to those parents, how are you doing? How is your child doing? So it was a horrific incident, and the response was even more horrific.
So in 1 minute, what I would do differently is I would say no when staff asked the board to remain neutral and serve as a hearing panel for the expulsion cases that they had coming up. Once they asked us to do that, then it was incumbent on the board to remain out, to not communicate, to be absolutely neutral, to be unbiased. You don't have the jury talking to one party in a case. That's what we were asked to do, to be that jury. I would have said, you know what, my job, I think, is to communicate with the community at large, and I'll just have to recuse myself when it comes time for that expulsion hearing. So that's what I would have done differently.
Brian?
Wow, in a minute, sheesh. I think, well, I'll share a story. But first I'll say what I would have done differently is I would have communicated with the parents each step of the way, instead of them just being hit with surprise after surprise after surprise. Oh, the board did that? What? But I met with one of the parents right after it kind of happened. I met with one of the dads, and we were having a conversation outside of this meeting that we had to try and figure out what the next steps would be. And I remember having a conversation with him, and usually guys shake hands or we give like a nod, but after listening to him not know what to do next, we both just looked at each other, and after a couple of minutes, we just cried together, and I gave him a hug. And you know, guys don't usually do that, but we hugged for like an uncomfortable 2 or 3 minutes, because I just didn't know, I didn't know what to tell him to do if it was my kid, and he didn't know what to do and it was his child, and it definitely could have been handled a lot differently. My time's up.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think 2 important things. One, people needed to feel heard and valued, and that didn't happen. And I think there are things that could have been done to change that, better communication, maybe better decisions. I think better representation where people look at a board and see diversity. That's why I think it's really important that we elect diverse representatives from our community. I think it matters. I think that taking a more proactive and aggressive role in administration, I think the school board's job is not to micromanage the district, but it is to think critically about what the administration is asking you to do and about the information that they're giving. And I know things unfolded quickly. I think this is a perfect example of when the administration needed to be held accountable for the fact that it was not responding adequately to what was happening. The last thing I just want to say is that I also think the impression that this was an isolated incident, it is an egregious case, etc., but it represents real racism and structural problems in our society that we need to continue to grapple with and not pretend that we've wrapped it up.
I just want to get a time check.
Yes, so we could either do one more question and then the closing statements, or we could do the closing statements now. Do you have, how do your questions look? Is there
Yeah,
a really good one?
There's two left.
There's two left?
And, yeah.
Maybe we should just go to the closing statements
Okay.
now then.
Yeah.
So 1 minute each.
Okay.
Could I just add that I think if you're available after we're done, if your question didn't get answered, maybe stay afterwards and you can ask it individually.
Okay, so let's see. Clementina, if you can start with your closing statement, a 1-minute closing statement.
Okay, basically two things, probably in my more recent experiences this last year in talking with folks in all different stakeholders in the community. I think probably the overall major issue is lack of trust. And that's really serious. And we have to figure out how to build trust, how to begin to build trust again. Teachers are, I've heard from a lot of teachers, participation on lots of committees, and then their recommendations disappear. Parents don't know who to go talk to. I think the board's role, besides making policy, is to be more proactive. I think it's a new day and a new leadership that is required in the overall community and in our society, so I'm saying let's all go proactive.
So I didn't try to prepare a closing statement. I'm going to use my 1 minute to say something more about Instagram. And that is that for me, the most challenging part about that year and a half has been that I couldn't be the person I am. I couldn't say what I wanted to say because I was observing the school district's legal jeopardy. Anything that I said was going to be used in the lawsuits that were being filed against the school district. So for me, the challenging part has been that right and wrong just didn't line up with legal and illegal in any nice way. I think many people know, but not everyone, the district has won part and lost part of some of those lawsuits. A federal judge ruled that we violated the First Amendment free speech rights of some of those students. So I have to watch out for the district's legal position, but it doesn't line up with what I personally feel is right and wrong.
Brian?
I think that the most important thing, well, two things. One, when you drop your kids off at school, it's a confidence that you have in the school that your child's going to be safe. It's the one place where everybody has to leave their child and go to work or wherever it is that they go. But it's the one place where you have to leave your child. Even the super overprotective parent that doesn't let their kids do anything without extra pads has to leave their kid at school. So it's important for those parents to have the confidence that their children are going to be safe, and it's important for those students to see diverse representation throughout the district where they go to school. And that should be represented from the janitorial staff, all the way up to the board. When they look at the board, they should see people that look like that.
I would like to reiterate the question of trust. I agree is important, that it needs to be rebuilt between the board and the community. I think that that trust will also be helped by what Brian just said, that kids need to see teachers and elected representatives that look like them. And that, to me, is the most important priority in this election. I think that the most important thing for you to know about potential board members is how they're gonna make decisions that we can't anticipate right now. We know the budget is an issue, we know the building, the construction issues are gonna be ongoing, but we don't know what the next Instagram incident is gonna be. We don't know what the next crisis is gonna be. So I think evaluating us on our ability to collaborate and communicate and be transparent about the orientation we're using to make decisions is the most important thing you should think about.
I guess I would say I'm kind of running as a white male in a rather interesting time. But y'all will judge me by the content of my character, and not the color of my skin. So I would say communication is a huge thing. Communication and trust, and I think trust has been beaten up pretty badly. And I'd like to think the board enjoys some trust for the efforts we've been making to try to communicate better. I absolutely would pledge to communicate as well as I can. How many of you all here have attended a board meeting? How many of you all have sent email or called a board member more than twice in the past year? Okay, it's a much smaller group, and we're here. We are around. We can be reached. I know a lot of people are speaking at board meetings because it's the public, it's a grandstand. People can say, I really need money for this. Don't take away the money for that. But talk to us all the time. You know, when we're not in board meetings, we can chat a lot. So I'd say encouraging communication and trust is a huge part of my plan too.
Okay, thank you all to the.
Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate you coming out. We'll have